Hello, Queens. I have Cath Counihan with me today, if I say her name correctly. I'm just going to let her in the waiting room and see if I like this more authentic intro. Let's see. Hello, Cath. Good afternoon.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Fine, thanks. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for being here because I know your time is very precious, as is mine, but I appreciate you being here to share your wisdom.
Oh, thank you. How are you doing? How was your pregnancy?
Yeah, it's going great. I'm 36 weeks
Wonderful.
already. So
Wow.
time flies. It's funny, time flies, but then at the same time, it goes really slow. It's like both at the same time, if that makes any sense.
Wow.
Yeah.
And do you know anything about your birth, or you're just gonna let it unfold?
So we have an intention, and we're of course open for nature to do what nature might do or not do. But we're having a water birth at home.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes. Very.
Lovely. That's amazing. And do
Yeah.
you have a nice midwife? Do you have a private midwife, or are you going?
I have a doula and a midwife. So
Oh,
in the Netherlands, honestly, Kath,
are
it's
you living in
crazy.
the Netherlands?
Yes, that's where I live.
Oh, oh, I didn't realize that. Oh,
Yeah.
you can get a crown stalk. That's amazing.
Exactly. And they love pregnant women and birthing and after the birth for I think it's 9 days. You get someone come to your house for 6 hours a day to help you with the house stuff, cooking, the baby, like because it's our first child. I don't even know how to put a nappy on, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, it can't be rocket science, but they help you with like all of that and it's included in your insurance. So we're well taken care of and they encourage home births, which I really like.
It's wonderful. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm so pleased you're not in this country because my sister's in Holland. Um,
Ah,
and she's had all her babies there. And the first when she had her first, so our mother is dead. And when she had her first baby, not the mom, the woman who came had
yeah.
blonde hair and a bob up to here. And she was just really like her mom. And so all of
Wow.
us sisters were like, oh, could we have that too? I mean, it sounds really amazing.
It's
Um,
very supported over here. And like we have a private doula as well, because we wanted support emotionally and spiritually. And I think a lot of people forget about the husband in all of this. And obviously it's primarily my experience in labor, but it's a joint experience. And it takes, I think, a strong, aligned, emotionally stable man to hold his woman in labor
yes.
without him being traumatized by the entire process,
Yes.
you know?
And he also not support. And I think that unfortunately, I was thinking about this morning about men and vulnerability. We
Yeah.
don't let men have their own vulnerability and
Mm.
you know, be sad or cry. We want them to not be like that. Well, not I'm not saying me, but like in society. And
Yeah.
so it's so nice that he is also can be supported because then he can have his own vulnerability and not
Yeah.
have to split that off and be all like whatever. I don't know.
Exactly. He's working on vulnerability and allowing himself to express his emotions anyway, because as you say, he was brought up with real men don't cry, big boys don't cry, like, and he held everything in. And in fact, he hasn't cried in his entire adult life until I told him I was pregnant, and then we went to a
To make
spiritual
me cry.
coach together because he had an immediate trauma response. He was like, let's get rid of it immediately. And
Oh,
I was like, I don't know if I can because something within me wants this. So we went to a coach that we trust together. We walked into the room, and the coach who he trusts and honors, like asked him questions, and he just released so much. And I was like, this is good. This is good. Like this all needed to come out. And so after that release, he was 1,000% on board, and we've never looked back. So emotions are so important to be released, right? Yeah.
so important and so important to just be listened to, and I think that
Mm.
um it's so complex. Yeah, I mean, parenthood is so complex, but for the man, that thing about often women attraction is conditional often on them suppressing stuff often.
Yes.
Um, and so we have to really like shift so much of that.
Yeah, I think, in my opinion, seeing a man in his emotions and allowing that is true strength. Absolutely. As long as they can regulate themselves and they give themselves time, and then they can also support us when we need it. So I think we're all on our own journey, aren't we? But I think it's very strong of a man to allow himself to express emotions. I'm like wanting my husband to release emotions and let me know how he feels. So we need to change the stigma around this, don't we?
Yeah, we definitely do.
Yeah.
That's so exciting. I'm so excited that you're there for you. I mean, that's really lovely.
Thank you.
Wow. But
Thank
also you're still allowed to, just to say, because I think that I've also read some things about being in Holland, and then everyone thinks, oh, you should be fine because you've got these 9 days. Because
you.
9 days is still only 9 days. So it just
Yes, I'm open to, I mean, I say I'm as ready as I can be. I don't know because I've not experienced it before, but I feel emotionally strong and stable, physically strong and stable. I'm open to surrender and change because plans don't go to plan, and just taking time and being kind to myself. So I'm so glad it happened now and not, 7 years ago before my recovery journey, because I would not have been able to cope, I don't think. So
yeah, what a gift. And also, can I give you one bit of advice?
please,
I
yes.
know this is irritating in a way, but you can just stay at home. You don't have to rush off to baby swimming or
Oh
baby this or
no.
baby that. Like just cocoon yourself, you know?
Yes. What we're doing is it's actually called a baby moon, but not the modern baby moon where people go on holiday before they have the baby, like the traditional Eastern culture baby moon, where you take 40 days, just you and your partner and your baby, to just ground and acclimatize and love and not get dressed. And I mean, probably go outside at some point, obviously, but really take it slow. So we've really thought it through, and that feels good, nurturing.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. That's really beautiful.
Well,
Yeah.
thank
The only reason, like going outside just for some regulation and some sanity, but
you.
otherwise, there's too much pressure to like, no baby needs to go swimming, you know?
No, I mean, come on, there's enough time for that. So I'm just going to use my intuition, see how I feel, ask for help. We're a team. I'm very lucky that me and my husband, not everyone has a baby and they're a team, are they? But we really are, and it's going to grow us. It has grown us, and I feel in a really good place. So I'll let you know how it all unfolds.
Good. Yes, please do. I'd love to hear about this. Please do.
Thank you,
Just
Kat.
one more thing. Where are you in Holland?
A place called Hengelo, which is right on the east next to Germany.
Okay.
Heard of it? It's not, the nearest city is Enschede, and then you've got Utrecht.
Okay. So my sister's in Groningen.
Oh, Groningen,
Um,
that's beautiful. That's about 2.5 hours away from me. I think maybe up. Not
yeah, it's
sure.
up. It's in the north. They've just bought they used to live in Amsterdam, but her husband's a professor at the university there. And actually, she's also at the university, but they've just bought a flat in Amsterdam because she wants to spend more time there. I'm just going to move my chair. But um, I think Holland is wonderful.
It's
I really
gorgeous country. It's very clean. It's really well taken care of. I'm a country girl, and so we're not in the city. We're by loads of water and forests, and love that. And
lovely.
I also like coming back to England and having my time with my family and then seeing England again. But then I also like leaving again. So my parents divorced when I was younger, so it's almost like having two Christmases again when you have to go to one and then to the other type thing. Yeah. So, okay, I have so much to ask you. So, we're going to start with, well, officially welcome, Cath, to the Body Love Binge podcast. And
Thank
I
you.
would love for you to actually just I mean, you don't have to read your bio, but just share a bit about who you are and what you do for those of us that don't know in your own words. It's better than me reading it, actually.
Oh, thanks. Okay. Well, I'm a psychotherapist. I'm a trauma therapist. I'm a touch practitioner. So I've done something called transforming touch, which focuses on developmental trauma. I focus on the intersection between our own childhood trauma and parenting. In my view, is that we've got a lot more complex trauma out there in the population than people know, and that fundamentally affects all of the ways that we turn up. And um, we're not that aware of it, particularly because some of the coping strategies make us seem so functional. So
Yeah.
things like perfectionism, particularly, and overgiving and overworking and control and people pleasing are often very celebrated. And particularly in a career situation, people pleasing and perfectionism are like a kind of a rocket ship combination in a way. So, and throw a bit of overworking in, and then, you know what I mean? You're going straight to the top in a way. And we don't actually realize how maladaptive they are often until perhaps we burn out, or we get an autoimmune condition, or we have an eating disorder, or we're like an alcoholic, or we take lots of drugs or something. And then we kind of start to unravel um, how our safety is so wrapped up in these coping strategies, which are
Mm.
originate in childhood. And all of that combined in parenthood is like, I don't know, a big sort of shit show, maybe.
Yeah, it's good. I was thinking
Excuse
those
my, I
words.
hope it's okay to swear on this podcast. So
Absolutely.
um, I am very interested in helping and supporting around that, because whenever we've had a dysfunctional family, there's a core of shame.
Mm.
So we're desperately trying to keep away from that core of I'm not good enough, or somehow I'm defective. And so it's really difficult to ask for help.
Yes. I
Um,
mean, those four things: difficult to ask for help, perfectionism, overachieving, and people pleasing. I ticked past tense. Still working on the people pleasing part, but still, I ticked all those four boxes in the past. Did you too? Did you
yes,
identify with all of those things too?
yes, yes.
Okay, we're going to start off with 7 yes or no questions, just to break the ice, like some quick fire questions, and then 3 just quick fire questions. Then we'll dive into the juice, and I've got loads to ask you.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay, so number 1, is childhood trauma often a root cause of eating disorders?
Yes,
Can full recovery from an eating disorder be achieved without addressing underlying trauma?
not in my opinion, no.
Same. Do eating disorders always stem from control issues?
Yes, largely I would say that, unless I can think about. There's some things that are very sensory,
Mm,
um, but I guess we're not going to talk about something like ARFID, but that
no.
is kind of like a sensory thing and related to other, but that also has some trauma things. But I'm not an expert in ARFID, but um, I would say largely yes.
Yes. Number 4, is it possible for someone to recover without professional help?
I think so. Yes, I
Mm.
think that we all different things help us, and yes, I do think that's possible.
Yeah. Can family dynamics contribute to recovery without professional? Oh, no, wait, I put 2 questions in one. Ignore that. Let me go again. Can family dynamics contribute to the development of childhood trauma?
Absolutely, it's a huge part.
Are, are eating disorders more prevalent in women than men?
Um, I thought it was in women, but and historically men have been ignored a lot in this space, but there's a huge development in focusing on men's eating disorders, because often it's more in body dysmorphia.
Yeah,
But yes, there's a huge, men also get very impacted by eating disorders.
yeah. Is early intervention crucial for overcoming childhood trauma-related disorders?
Um, no, because early intervention is often not possible, and it's I would say early intervention for parents who are at who have had their own childhood trauma when they become parents is crucial.
Yeah,
However, children who are experiencing childhood trauma, unless it's extremely obvious and they're known to, say, social services in that country or child protection services, often there's a massive discrepancy between appearance of the family on the external like view and what's going on internally. So that would be missed largely. And that thing about what goes on at home stays at home. So often such an unwritten rule that
mm,
there's not a possibility for early intervention, I would say, unless it's like there's like prison and the police and child services involved.
yeah. No, I
Does
get
that
it.
make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Uh, all about you. That's 3. Your favorite food?
Oh my word. What's my favorite food? I love mango. I grew up in South Africa and I love fresh mango.
Love that. Favorite smell?
Oh, rose geranium. It's an aromatherapy oil and I love that scent.
Favorite sound?
Oh, I think silence.
What did you say? Violence?
No,
Oh,
silence. I've got 8-year-old twins, so I know. What is my favorite sound? I love music, like uplifting music, but I also like silence.
I actually love that as an answer, Kath. I mean, I remember reading one of Eckhart Tolle's book. I think it was the original, The Power of Now, and he was saying something like, I mean, of course, he will say it a lot better than me. Like this, we don't really pay attention to the silence, but the silence between the next music note or the silence between someone speaking and the words they use actually allows the noise, the music, the voice to be heard. And then I started to see silence in such a different way and started to really focus on it. And then that brings peace and all the cool things that comes with being in the present moment too.
Yeah. It's so restful, silent, sort of just really sort of letting us rest in the moment. And as like a recovering overworker and overdoer, just being in silence is very healing, I find, or restorative.
Yeah, I agree. Right, okay. I'm trying to think to myself, where shall I start with asking you things? So I would love to start with kind of my own history, and I see it a lot in my clients. Those are clients that come to me for eating disorder recovery, and those that come to you for eating disorder recovery. I always believe there's a reason why the eating disorder was created. And in my opinion, this isn't my quote, I don't know whose it is, but it resonated a lot. It's not why the addiction, it's why the pain. And I
Yes,
used
that's
to
Gabor
say,
Mate, I think.
who is it?
Gabor Mate.
Oh, thank you for acknowledging who it was from because it wasn't mine. I saw it on a documentary I was watching. And I used to say and genuinely believe until I dismantled this, I had a great childhood. It was perfect. Like I had, I wasn't beaten at all. I was fed. Like we went on holiday every year. And a lot of clients, until they get to the inner child section in my modules, until we dive into that, they really think and believe that they had a wonderful childhood. Now, I don't want to take that away from them or say parents are to blame, but can you talk about perhaps the fantasizing of that and why we perhaps do that?
And I think that I mean, okay, so I think if we look at what we need in as a baby and in childhood, we need to be physically kept safe. So
Yeah.
we need like clothes and a roof and everything and warmth. We need food. So we need to have enough energy to live.
Mm,
And most importantly, I would actually suggest is we need emotional connection and we need nurturing.
yeah.
So emotional nurturance. And that thing, the third thing, is often missed out on and is not known to be that important. So we
Mm,
have parents who profess to deeply love us, and yet they don't know what that actually means and they don't know how to do that. And that's not to blame the parents,
mm,
um, because like let's say I know you're sitting in Holland now and I'm in England, but if we consider the history of these two countries, even just in the last 100 years, there's been so much trauma, so much trauma.
yeah.
Like if we think about the Second World War and um, all of the things, all the wars, all the current wars we have in this world, and so people haven't really the culture has always just been let's keep a lid on the emotions because they thought mistakenly that that would make us weak essentially and that emotions were not important and there's been a huge development in neuroscience and like the 1990s was called the decade of the brain in the States. And so we learned a lot more about emotions. We learned a lot more about how our brain works. And we really got backing or scientific backing for attachment theory that
Mm,
we are relational creatures. We are driven more by the need for connection than by anything else, actually.
yeah.
But we haven't known that. So I am 48. I'm not sure how old you are, but
37.
57. Okay, so our parents and our grandparents, that wasn't really focused on the
Mm,
need for emotional nurturance. There was a lot of stuff around just feed the baby on a strict routine, and basically leave it the rest of the time.
mm,
In this country, there's a lot of. I had twins, and so we, at some point, needed some help, and we got a maternity nurse. And some of them were saying to me, like, just leave them in the garden. We didn't actually have a garden, but and let them look at the trees. And I'm like, are you crazy? Like,
wow.
what sort of, but there's a lot of that type of logic of the baby doesn't remember, the baby doesn't know anything. And
Mm,
actually, babies are very prescient beings and they have got a lot of, their nervous system is operational from birth. So even though they don't have a frontal cortex, they're picking up on everything via their senses.
yeah.
And we haven't known that. So we haven't been able to kind of give adequate attention to that.
Mm.
And now we know better. And so that thing about I had a lovely childhood, you wouldn't have known, because a lot of this is pre-verbal, a lot of this trauma is
Yeah.
pre-verbal.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't have known that you had a completely shut down emotional life. You wouldn't have known that when you were crying, you may not have been picked up
Mm.
because they thought that would spoil you.
Yes.
Mm. You may not have, you know, all of that stuff. Actually, when we're crying, we just need soothing. We want to be held on a chest, have a regulating heartbeat, a soft voice, maybe
Mm.
someone patting us, stroking us. And that kind of magical work, which a caregiver can do, we haven't valued that enough. You know, we just haven't, like, attachment theory came in the 1960s, and with the work of John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth and Mary Maid, they did like fantastic work on attachment. But that didn't kind of permeate the kind of the consciousness of society, really. It's permeating it now a lot. And as I said, with neuroscience, we now have real backing that we are so relationship driven. We
Mm.
seek out contact.
Yes.
But many of us just did not have enough nurturing in childhood.
Yeah.
So we're vulnerable from an eating disorder point of view, because what the nurturing does is actually that's wiring in emotional regulation. Attachment is all about nervous system regulation.
Yes. Wow.
Um, does that make
Yes,
sense?
absolutely. Because I've read the book you've suggested, the two books, the Parenting from the Inside Out, and I've almost finished Why Love Matters. And the amount of highlight I've highlighted in Why Love Matters to obviously help me with my work and to make more sense of my clients and my childhood is just mind blowing. So what you're saying makes complete sense. And again, it's no fault of the parents, but I've heard time and time again, if the baby is fed, clean, and changed or whatever, or then just leave it to cry and it will
I
get
know,
over it.
that's so hard. I know. And the thing is, what's also devastating, especially in the space that I work in, is that if the parents are very under resourced
Yes, yeah,
and don't are not held in like a web of support to hold them up,
yeah,
there will be times when that has to happen, because
yeah.
otherwise they may throw the baby against the wall
Mm,
because they themselves are so under resourced and their own past is so triggered in the moment. So they are so activated that the sensory experience of listening to a baby cry literally blows them right out of the water, and they have to be away, if that
yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, and if the parent, and again, no fault to the parents because we do the best with what we have and what we know, but if a parent like my mum could not regulate her own emotions, she didn't even know how she felt because she was so disassociated.
Yeah,
No matter how much she loved me and my sister, how could she possibly regulate us in our emotions if she can't even do it for herself?
yeah, exactly. And what you learn as a child then with a dissociated mum is
Yeah,
that you need to also dissociate, because
absolutely.
yeah, and I think that's also a huge part of eating disorders, the
Yeah.
dissociation, and how the food also helps with that.
Yeah,
um
because I remember when I was diagnosed with anorexia when I was about 12. I obviously, very blessed to get support. I wasn't ready for the support, but still I got the support like therapy and counseling, etc. And all they were trying to focus on was the root of why it happened. And all they could look at as to what would make sense for them is, oh, well, your grandma passed away and that's why. And I mean, that might have had something to do with it, but it was so much deeper than that. And I didn't realize until I started to unpick it all because I was a perfectionist, an overachiever, a people pleaser. And that is all from the babyhood and childhood I'd had. And I was trying to be good enough. I think, do you think at the root of everything, we're just trying to be good enough and get connection?
yes, and I also think that from a nervous system point of view, you know, the ways in which we interact with food is very, it can either help us further dissociate,
Yeah,
um, or it helps us regulate. You know, chewing itself is very regulating, or it's a way we push down things that feel too painful.
yeah,
And I think we need more research into, you know, we can induce a psychological high as well in terms of the way that we use food.
yeah,
And so we need, I believe, more research into what's actually going on in the physiology of
Mm.
all of these different things.
Yeah.
Um, and often that thing about control, when you mentioned that question,
Mm.
I wasn't able to give like a pure yes no answer, because often it's actually when we have been controlled,
Yes.
we then try and exert some control
Mm.
over our food in some
Yeah.
way or restriction, because that's kind of the only place that we have any agency if we've got very controlling parents.
Yes. And I remember feeling powerless before the eating disorder and then very powerful in the anorexia, especially because of that control aspect. And almost like, my parents divorced, stuff happened in the past, people died. And I was also going through puberty at such a young age. So there was just so much. And I didn't know how to regulate my emotions because my mum
Of
didn't
course
know
you can't.
how
Yeah.
either.
Yeah.
So in order to try and cope, because ironically, even though it's not, I suppose it is helpful at some point, I think as humans, we try and cope. It's an act of self-love in a kind of fucked up way.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's a way of regulating addiction. So any food addiction, whatever it is our best attempt to
Yes.
regulate. We really have to honor it as a coping strategy. We can't just um, criticize it, because that was your best attempt to manage something in the moment,
Yeah.
and it's got a real payoff because it does do that.
Yeah. It did originally.
Yeah, it
And
does originally. Yeah,
and then
and it
then
starts
it
to do.
becomes the thing that actually ends up killing you in the end. But you're right, the
Yeah,
restriction for me, without realizing it until I've unpicked all of this, numbed everything and just made me feel powerful. Then
yeah,
after I weight restored in quotes because I wasn't up to my natural weight, but I was on the BMI chart in a healthy range, so then everything apparently was fine and off you go, even though mentally and emotionally I was still very much not okay.
yeah,
Then the binge eating and bulimia happened. So it was the restriction, but then the numbing with food and getting so much in one go and then purging it out. And that was honestly until I was 30. And I know so many people struggle for so long too. And it's not simple, is it? But I can see now so clear that all of that was just a way of me trying to soothe myself and cope with emotions I didn't even know I probably had.
exactly. Because I think with especially with bulimia, that imagery of what are we trying to shove down first of all, and then, well, what are we literally trying to get rid of, which and often we don't actually know we're trying to get rid of it because it's so split off, if
Yeah,
that makes sense. And
yeah,
so recovery is a lot about integrating and allowing all those wounded, disavowed parts and kind of sweeping them back in, and just like giving them so much love. I mean, I made it sound really simple there, but it's the most complicated thing in the world, I think, that but yeah. And I think the food thing, of all the I will use the word addiction here, but of all the addictions, is the most complicated in my view to
mm,
unpick, because of how tightly connected it is to soothing, to
yeah.
unpleasant sensory experiences, and to love.
Yeah, like if you think of a baby and a mother who's breastfeeding, even though the baby will let the mother know in its best way possible that I need feeding, feeding is a form of comfort and connection too.
Yeah.
So I guess all eating is emotional eating, not in a negative context, but all eating is emotion. Well, not all of it, but would you say a lot of eating is emotional
Well,
somehow?
I think that as a baby, you would kind of, as a baby, you would register hunger with a sense of discomfort. So you would register, oh, I feel like maybe some pain in my tummy because it's a bit empty. And um, you don't know what those sensations are, but you have an uncomfortable set of sensations.
Mm,
And that's alleviated by milk. So it gives you a warm, sort of full feeling.
yeah,
I think the issue comes where everything is soothed in that way. So instead of because what babies often want is comfort, and breastfeeding is comforting, feeding is comforting.
mm,
But trying to kind of discern, and this is a learning process for all parents. Is this, do they need comforting or do they need feeding? And you can
yeah,
try feeding first and then go to comforting. But I think many of us, and past babyhood, were just soothed with food. So given a snack as a treat, or rewarded not to cry with food,
yes,
or shut up essentially with food, like given like I used to be given like massive bowls of porridge, just fed and fed and fed bowls of porridge. And but that's one of the ways that I've learned to kind of soothe. You
Yeah,
know, it's so
totally agree.
complex.
Yeah, it can show us a lot about ourselves, though, our relationship with food, but we need, in my opinion, yes, I also believe like you can recover without professional help. I think it's rare because we need a professional that we trust who knows what to look for and who knows what to ask to help us unpick why we're doing what we're doing and where it stemmed from and what we need instead.
Yes. So yes, I agree. When I said without professional help, I know people who have recovered, for example, by going to a group. So
Right.
doing either in this country, I don't know why this is the case, but mostly in the UK, everything is called Overeaters Anonymous, even
Yeah.
though it's actually anorexia, bulimia, all
Mm.
different types of things. But it's all labeled that. But in the States, there's much more differentiated meetings. And
Yeah.
that's not professional because that's peer-to-peer support. And
Right.
that can be miraculous for people.
Yeah, I don't like personally Overeaters Anonymous because, and again, I've not been, but I know from a lot of previous clients that have shared with me what goes on in there. And of course, people do it to try and help people at the heart of everything. But there's a lot of abstaining from sugar and
Yes.
abstaining from carbs. And in my opinion, that actually plays into and feeds the eating disorder more,
Yeah.
and it creates further problems down the line. I've seen that time and time again.
Yes. I think I would agree that well, it does promote more disordered eating in many
Yes.
cases. And I think that what actually has to happen in many cases is that that's a stepping stone initially for people
Yeah, to
um,
get support.
to get support and then to go on to some professional help. And I think there's also the possibility that some people do need to abstain from those if they have like some people, sugar doesn't work for them or white flour doesn't work for them.
Mm.
Because you're right, in OA, they do say they recommend an abstinence of no sugar, no white flour. Um, and I think there's a huge range of how people recover in
Yeah.
in food disorders. I personally, if I try and give up carbs, I go crazy. You know,
I
I
binge on them in secret.
yeah, well, and my body feels like I feel like a little bit hysterical, and my body feels really I don't know, it just feels a bit like I need them.
Mm.
So for me, that does not work.
Yeah, same. I mean, I gave up restriction a long time ago now, best thing I ever did. But the more I tried to restrict, let's say, sugar, the more I would actually end up eating it in secret and binging on it anyway. So even if sugar was quote unquote bad for your health, no matter what I did, because I lost the ability to restrict, a
Yeah,
blessing in disguise, I ended up eating more of it when I restricted it anyway. So then I found the best and only way to true food freedom and self-love and genuine health and care for yourself is to allow and work on all the deeper stuff and work, there's so much, of course, it's not
so
just a
much. Yeah,
step one, two, three, four, and then off you go. That's why
yeah,
everyone's so different.
yeah.
But restriction doesn't work, especially long term, in my opinion, for recovery.
It hasn't worked for me either.
No.
Um, but I know people who it has worked for or who continue to do that sort of thing as because that's the way they have maintained their sanity.
Yeah.
Um, it doesn't work for me. And I think also so much of what we actually need is connection. Like
Yes.
going into like, oh my word, like I notice now when I want to, if I want to eat something, it's might because I'm lonely.
Mm.
And like motherhood is a different pathway. You're not in an office all day. I mean, obviously I work, but it's different to how it used to be. And
Yeah.
so I notice and sharing about something, sharing vulnerably takes away that urge because you get the need met, but it's so complex to unpick because the food recovery is really in the minutiae of how much we are wanting to actually look at our own internal experience, you
Yeah.
know?
How much we're willing to do that.
Yeah, how much we're willing to do that. Because that's sometimes such a pain. You just think,
Yes.
I want to just eat that, whatever it is. Yeah.
And that will soothe me in the moment, and that's always
Yeah.
okay. But if you want to fully be free,
Yeah.
mentally, physically, emotionally around food, we
Yeah.
need to be doing the deeper work, right? And asking ourselves the questions and being gentle and being curious. So, have you got time to describe to us the different attachment styles and how, and give an example of how that might play out in adulthood?
So there's two kind of main categories. The main categories are secure and insecure.
Yeah.
And within the insecure sort of bucket, there's what's commonly described as anxious attachment or ambivalent attachment, avoidant attachment, and disorganized attachment.
Mm,
Now, we often see, especially on social media, we see a lot about avoidant and about insecure or ambivalent attachment, because ambivalent attachment is often described as being very needy, we're emotionally needy. But
right.
really, what all of those are is that our parents weren't able to be attuned enough to us. So
Mm,
secure attachment is that they were able to be present enough for us and attune. So attunement is really important, where
mm,
you respond to the baby's needs. You
yeah.
don't you don't profess to kind of, because we can all say, oh, I love you, but if you don't know how to actually attune to them and notice what's going on for them, they won't feel that. So
Yes.
starting in babyhood, it's very much like, say your baby's crying, you might respond with like, oh, sweetie, are you feeling, you're really upset. I'm here for you. I'm going to see what's going on. Are you hungry? And you'll notice how parents often talk, they've got like a sing-song prosody, because that's attachment. That's attachment stuff. You're kind of speaking in a gentle voice. You're
Mm,
using touch. You're using eye contact. You're using your own body,
mm,
because we've given the tools of attachment. It's our hands, our eyes, our ears, our mouth, essentially, and our body, our heartbeat. And
yeah.
so with our baby, we would be like noticing, okay, so you're not hungry. I've changed your nappy. Maybe you really needed some comfort. I'm here for you. And kind of put them on your heart or on your chest and pat them a bit or rock them. And we would secure attachment is that you kind of get that right. But there's research from Ed Tronick, who's an amazing researcher in the States, that in secure attachment dyads, which
Mm,
is and the dyad is generally the mother baby, the mother is attuned, so getting that right about 33% of the time, and the rest of the time she's repairing or coming
how
back into attunement.
interesting. That's a
Yeah.
lot where this is my judgment or opinion. That's a lot where she's perhaps not in. I know no one's perfect, obviously, but that's interesting that only 33% of being completely in tune and the rest of repairing, which I'm sure you're going to go into, which is very important. But that creates a secure attachment, which is what we want, right?
Yeah, we ideally would like secure attachment. So it's
Yeah.
being seen enough of the time and knowing that we're lovable all of the time, essentially.
Yeah.
And secure attachment is from an outcomes point of view in adulthood, it makes all the difference. We securely attached. Now I am not securely. I mean, I am now securely attached because of the work that I've done to
Yeah.
myself. So, but I was insecurely attached. So I don't want anyone listening to this to think, or because basically everyone listening to this is probably insecurely attached.
Exactly. How much would you say in percentage of the, let's say, either the world or the UK, whichever one you want to give? I know it's such a hard thing to say. How much of the world do you think is actually securely attached without having to do all the work in adulthood because of all the shit show?
Honestly, I don't think many. The research, interestingly, says about, I think it's about 50-50 between secure and insecure. I need to check that for the latest figures, but I really personally think that's rubbish.
Yeah.
Because I think that there's more people that are insecurely attached. And within the insecure attachment bucket, avoidant, ambivalent, or ambivalent, and disorganized, we
Mm.
often used to think that disorganized was quite minor, but I have elements of disorganized attachment. You
Mm.
know, it's very so what happens when someone's avoidant is that essentially the parent can't kind of tend to you enough and they tend to avoid their own emotional experience.
Yeah.
So you learn that your own emotional experience is too much
Yes.
and you split it off and avoid it.
Right.
And then, and this is very simplified, in disorganized attachment, that's often where there's a lot of addiction in the family, or there's parents who represent danger. So
Mm,
you both are the source of comfort and the source of danger. And from a child's point of view or baby's point of view, they know, we know that we need our attachment figures. So we adapt anyhow we can
mm-hmm.
to make sure that we can get any type of care from this parent, even if this parent is in active drug addiction, essentially. We will kind of minimize our own needs. And this is all, I mean, we're very sophisticated, so we kind of will stop crying so that we can still keep our parent on
Okay.
side.
Right. So babies are really smart.
Yeah, they're really smart because it's
Yeah.
about survival. So
Yeah.
it's not that their brain is online doing this. This is
No.
their nervous system is picking up um, like what needs to happen. They're picking up signs from the environment because we all have an active nervous system, and they're picking this up um, under the level of conscious awareness all the time. How do we need to be so that we can kind of stay in contact?
Yeah.
And then the insecure attachment is where we sometimes get some care. So we do get care, but the parent themselves is often overwhelmed. They're insecurely attached. They may be depressed. They may be anxious. And so they can't be consistent enough of the time.
Mm.
And I am like that. So and in adulthood, we are then very anxious. We're
Yeah.
anxious about our partner. We're anxious about the people around us. We're hyper vigilant. We want to know how do I need to be to make sure you're okay.
Yeah.
Um, we often are described as codependent because we are desperately trying to make sense of what is it that you need me to do so that you can be okay, so that then I can be okay,
Yes.
essentially.
So
That makes
it's
sense?
like you can't be, well, as a baby, you are dependent. That's the point. But
Yeah.
as an adult, you can't be dependent on self. You don't know how to connect with yourself, how to soothe yourself, and you need something or someone else in order to regulate yourself somehow.
Yes. And that's why often with people pleasing is really, it's actually a control thing in a way, because we are trying to make sure that you like us enough so
Yeah.
that we can be okay.
Yes.
And it's not about us being nice, you know.
Yeah, surface level we think it is, but it's not. I think Emma Terrell, oh, I wonder if I can remember the quote or paraphrase. She said something like, people pleasing isn't necessarily all about being a caring person. That's part of it, but it's not all about that. It's about trying to rearrange the feelings of other people so we don't have to sit in the uncomfort of their feelings. That something like that. So like you're saying, it's actually not just because we're nice, it's because we want to be good enough and we're trying to control people's emotions around us so we feel okay and we get what we need.
And it's so much related to having to do that in childhood, to make
Yes.
sure that and maybe we had to coach our parents emotionally, maybe we had to tend to their emotions, whatever. But it's just basically we were not there. And so much of recovery is allowing ourselves to sit with discomfort and allowing ourselves to sit with other people's discomfort and not make it about us. Because
Yeah.
often in couples, um, avoidant people are attracted to ambivalent people. And
Mm.
then in a couple relationship, we have to make sure that we are each tending to our own needs enough that we don't constantly sit in our attachment styles. Um,
Yes.
that's like an extremely common combination. And I had a therapist once who said to me, you will always be attracted to avoidant men, but
Mm.
it's the degree to which they're avoidant and the degree to which you're tending to yourself so that you're not trying to get all your needs desperately met by them. That makes
Yeah.
sense.
It's so, have you got 15 minutes from this time, from this point?
Yes.
Okay, good, because it's going to, depending on what, if you had or not, it depends on what I'm going to ask you next. So I want to be respectful of your time. Okay, that's great. So do you think, and I've noticed this within myself looking back, a lot of people choose a partner because, let's say someone's got a triangular shaped hole within their psyche or emotional well-being or whatever, and this partner has a perfect triangle shaped thing to fill this gap in someone, and then vice versa. That's why opposites attract unless we're fully healed, which, does that ever happen to be fully healed? Who knows?
Who knows? I mean, I think we're always on a journey of kind of evolution and development, but
Mm.
um, yes, I think that so our model of love
Yeah.
is often based generally always has an origin with our um, the model of relationship we had with our opposite sex parent.
Yeah.
So if I take myself as an example, I'm the eldest of 5 children, one who died in infancy. My father was an alcoholic, and so he was avoidant, because when a parent is in active addiction, they are not be able to be present. So
Yeah.
my model, and so then I was always being trying to please and kind of get attention essentially.
Mm.
So then
Yeah.
my model of attraction is avoidant men. In my 20s,
Interesting.
I didn't like people who were nice. That felt really boring, because
Yeah.
from a nervous system point of view, there's not the same charge. It's
Mm.
not, if like, I won't even feel alive if I don't have to work for this, you know?
Yes. Yes.
Um, and and so then we kind of try, and because really what we're trying to do is subconsciously heal all those wounds. There's that thing about, if I can do this over, then I can heal the original wound. But we have to choose people who are available, but it takes us many times often to get there.
Yeah. And it takes work within yourself as well, doesn't it? And
So much
understanding
work.
what you're
Yeah.
doing. You
Yeah.
just keep choosing a different partner with the same pattern, just in a different body,
Yes.
to try and, like, that's so interesting because my dad was very passive. Maybe you can help me like solidify like the partners I've chosen in the past. My mum was the one in control, the one who wore the trousers. I was very codependent with my mother. And my dad was very much in the background, very submissive, kind of not really emotionally available, didn't really talk about his emotions, didn't express emotions, didn't really talk, was just in the background. And so, ironically, the first like serious boyfriend I had was the opposite to my dad. But I think that was because of two things. And I'd love your take on this, Kath. One, because my mum at that point left my dad and she was very controlling over me. And I lived with my dad without having a choice. So the partner I chose was very in his toxic masculine, very violent, very over manly, which I think replaced my mum in a weird way, like someone controlling me. And because I didn't have a strong masculine figure with my dad never stepping up, he was just always whatever your mum says goes. I was also trying to replace a strong masculine figure, which I never received in my dad. So can it be common for you to choose the opposite of your dad if
Or
you're
it sounds like your partner was the combination of your parents in a way. I
Mm,
mean, because what you said about the controlling,
yeah,
and the violence,
yeah.
um, that you didn't know that you didn't have to stand up for that. Or that you didn't know that that you could not, you didn't know that you didn't have to stay for that.
No, yeah. I thought unconsciously that, well, I needed some kind of control in my life in order to be okay, because I obviously don't know who I am without my mum controlling me or doing something.
Yeah. And to be honest, there's probably a lot more that's complex here
Mm,
that I'm sure you've worked through in therapy, that I don't I'd like to say something that's really out of order from your own history. But I think that we we are attracted to patterns that are familiar,
yeah.
and we learn what love looks like in our family of origin, and we learn what love feels like. So
Mm,
from a nervous system point of view, it's often intensity that we're actually drawn to.
yes. I was
And
adrenaline junkie, obsessed with horror movies because my nervous system needed to be spiked on high all the time. And
yeah,
this guy actually, although he was violent and controlling, he was completely emotionally unavailable because he was completely numb to his own emotions and all he would see is anger and act from anger. So I guess you're right. It was a combination of both that unconsciously I felt safe with when ironically I was very unsafe actually.
yes, yeah, exactly. And we have to learn, many of us have to, there's such a process of recalibrating our nervous systems,
Yeah.
and learning what does it actually feel like to be safe? Because safety is an embodied thing.
Yeah.
I can say something, like even in my own work, and I'm sure you know this in your own work, a client takes a while to feel safe. I can put on my website, I'm a safe, non-judgmental space, blah, 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 as much
Yeah.
as I like,
Yeah.
but that is not up to me to decide it. The
Yes.
client
Yes.
decides that eventually, or if they don't decide it, then maybe they leave or something. But and in those relationships, we actually have to learn, many of us, what it is to feel safe and connected and to allow that.
To allow that. Yeah, I love that word allow, because when I started to feel safe, it would manifest in, oh, I'm bored.
Yes.
So can
Yeah.
you talk to boredom? Because I remember one therapist asked me, and it was really interesting. She said, if you didn't feel bored, what might you be feeling? And I was like, well, first of all, I have resistance to even answering that question because I'm just bored. But actually, underneath the boredom was I was so afraid of sitting with myself because I didn't know how to regulate whatever emotion was to come up. It would manifest as boredom, and therefore I'd find something to do.
Yes. And also the boredom, often what happens with boredom is that we make up that it's something, it's not actually boredom. It's kind of starting to feel calmer in our systems often.
Mm,
And we make up, so it's so unfamiliar to us to
yeah.
feel this level of kind of maybe a kind of being calm in our nervous system, that because our psychological story is always from our nervous system state. And
Yes.
so we have to kind of notice, oh, maybe this is actually what peace feels like, or this is what maybe serenity feels like. But we immediately make that bad because it's not the intensity that we're used to.
Hmm.
And all of these things, well, not all of these things, but something like overworking or be consistently busy is a way not to be with ourselves, because often there's so much grief that actually needs to come up. I would say grief is one of the most important things that we need to do, or grieving,
Mm,
but um, it is so unpalatable for so many of us. We are so split from our vulnerability that going there itself feels so unsafe and
mhm.
almost dangerous.
Yeah, I resonate with that. And last 8 minutes, shame. I know you could talk an hour about shame. Where does shame come from? What is it? And why do so many of us have it?
So shame is an emotion. I think the problem with shame is that many of us have chronic or toxic shame. So
Yeah.
we have like a toxic sense of I am not good enough.
Hmm.
The literature on shame. So it's interesting because lots of people get confused between shame and guilt, but guilt is a sense of I did something wrong. So I spoke really unkindly to someone, or I don't know, I was mean or spiteful to someone. That was my behavior because in that moment I was triggered or
Mm.
tired or hungry or whatever. And we can kind of look at our behavior and think, I don't want to behave like that. Shame is when we have a sense of absolutely, I am just rubbish, basically. I get things wrong all the time.
Mm.
But often, and I think that that's what many of us actually have to recover from, is a sense of shame.
Yeah,
But we layer over that. Brene Brown talks about how shame and perfectionism are two sides of the same coin.
definitely.
We layer over the shame with this perpetual attempt at perfectionism, and just in all the ways, being more shiny, being more better, being more clever, working harder, da 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 da. So it's so hard to actually see that the shame is there because we look so fantastic from the
Yes.
outside in all the ways,
Yes.
um, when actually it's chronic shame that we're trying to escape from. And it comes in about our second year of life, when we see in our caretaker essentially that we are kind of too much.
Mm.
And everyone will experience those moments of shame, of kind of where the parent cannot regulate the affect. So affect is a term for emotion in the literature. And but there's repair. So if there's sufficient repair, we're not left with the chronic sense of shame. And
Right.
repairing is like, oh, um, okay, sweetie, I'm so sorry, or like whatever, just repairing with the child. And you
Mhm.
can repair with a tiny baby by
Mhm.
speaking, even though they won't understand your words, they'll understand the tone of your voice, they'll understand the connection, they'll understand the eye contact where you're coming back into connection.
Yeah.
And shame is an experience of being left with too much to cope with. Too
Mm.
much, though. Peter Levine, who's the creator of somatic experiencing, I think he's the one who says this. He talks about too much, too fast, too soon.
Yeah.
And we can experience, he talks about that as trauma, but we can, shame comes for our nervous system where it's too much, too fast, too soon. And no one helps us manage that down. So
Mm.
no one says, oh, that was so, say if you're screaming and crying as a child, or you hurt yourself, and instead of being tended to, your parent shouts at you, but you're
Mm.
actually devastated by your stubbing of your toe.
Mm.
And even if they do shout, because they are themselves shocked and upset to see that, they can then repair and say, oh, that was such a shock for you, sweetie. I'm so sorry about your toe, and I'm so sorry that I shouted. I got a massive fright because I was terrified, you'd been more damaged, more
Mm.
injured. And but I'm so sorry because that was such a shock for you. And
Yeah.
to really soothe the child in what has ever's happened,
Mm.
then you're not left with a sense of chronic shame because they've kind of repaired that. And you see that,
Yeah.
and you're not
Yeah.
left with this terrible, overwhelming affect,
Yeah.
which is what many of us were left with. So we
Yeah.
get left with this chronic sense of shame because toddlers and babies, no parent can be perfectly attuned. No
Mm.
parent can be um, always tending to your child with a nice, regulated voice. We get angry, we get irritated.
Yeah.
We're human. But we had parents who were shamed for their humanness, and then they shamed us for our humanness, essentially.
Yes.
So we could consider parenting in a way that is loving and connected is a reclamation of our humanness too, because we can't then say, you need to get it perfect, because that's just more shaming for us. And so,
Yeah.
like shame healing, we have to learn to have so much compassion for ourselves, and then to continuously nurture our relationship with ourselves and with our child. That to me is the biggest defense against shame. To sort
Yeah.
of say, even if we have really like had a rage attack and been terrible, we can still go back and repair and say, I'm so sorry. Like, anyway, I feel like I'm rabbiting on now,
Oh my God,
but
there's so much, Kath. So in order to heal shame within ourselves, because I can relate to that. So in the eating disorder, I almost had so much shame to be human. Like I was ashamed that I needed to eat because I was hungry.
yeah,
I was ashamed that I needed to go to the toilet because I had a human body. Like there was so much chronic and deep pain of shame of just me being me.
yes,
The eating disorder tried to fix that and it never did, of course. But I've learned to work through my shame through, like you said, loads of self-compassion,
yeah,
love, gentleness, understanding, and sharing. Because I think shame can only really exist in the darkness if we
exactly.
hold it within. So if we share it with someone who we love and trust and we're met with love,
Yes.
I think that
It's
helps
our
the journey.
healing. Absolutely. I think that's everything. I
Yeah.
always say shame keeps us sick, shame keeps us separate, and what's my other one? Sick, separate, and the other one is silent. Keeps us
Yeah.
silent because there's always someone else who's experienced what we've experienced. And I think what you said about the loo is another layer of complexity, particularly for women, because
Mm.
I think patriarchy has shamed us for our body, everything, anything like going to the loo. Like I used to have so much shame about anything related to the
Mm.
body, like something like burping. That was like,
Yeah.
oh,
It's not
like
ladylike to burp or fart or
exactly,
whatever it is.
exactly. I've started writing some things about my Substack because there's so much, especially around body stuff, that's
Mm.
the production of what we produce,
Yeah.
all the stuff we produce,
Yeah.
blood, breast milk, discharge, all of that. Like, what? We're fucking magical. We should not be
Yes.
shamed for us, but we have been so shamed. This makes me full of rage, this
Oh,
specific thing.
honestly, I mean, I could talk to you forever. And I have a question that I actually want to ask on air. Well, on air as if I'm on the radio, but on recording, you know what I mean?
It's your own TV show.
There we go. One day. Because I want listeners to know the answer anyway, but I want to know the answer because throughout this conversation, I just had this intuitive feeling like I need and want to work with Kath in my motherhood in my motherhood journey. Just because, I've worked a lot on myself, I know a lot, I help a lot of people, but there's always layers, and to understand it deeper, I think is really helpful. So how can people work with you? Do you have capacity? What does it look like to be helped by you in some way or another?
So I've got a free offering, which is a podcast called Grow Yourself Up, because I'm absolutely passionate about getting this information out into the world. And we all need to learn to love ourselves better.
Yes.
Um, and that has been my journey. Like, don't kid yourself, anyone who's listening to this, that I have had some sort of fantastic, perfect life. Because we learn
You
this
wouldn't
stuff because
be
we
who
need
you
to.
were today teaching what you are if you had, in my opinion, right?
Exactly. And so you're worthy. Whoever's listening to this is worthy. You're worthy of being loved better. And it starts with really you loving yourself better, I think.
Mm.
So this podcast, Grow Yourself Up. I work in private practice as a therapist. I'm full at the moment.
Mm. I thought
Um,
you might be, but
I do have openings. And also I'm doing some workshops. I'm doing a workshop on rage and triggers and reparenting on the 12th of November.
mm,
And I'm going to be developing more things to teach because I actually used to want to be a teacher before I was in financial services and before. And I think so much of this is psychoeducation and
yeah,
sharing stories. And
yes,
I made a commitment because obviously as a therapist, I don't talk about my own story at all in my client sessions because that's all about them.
mm,
Occasionally, I might do self-disclosure if they agree that they would like to hear something.
yeah,
Um, and the reason I started the podcast is because I was like, so many of us are existing in these silos where we think we're like so crap and so shamed and blah, 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 blah. And hearing the same stories and knowing that's a lot of my story as well, it's like I can share some of my story as like because I love talking and I love weaving together stories and the theory so that people can better understand themselves.
yeah.
So
That's how we understand ourselves through sharing stories because we're storytellers as biologically, aren't we? And
yeah, exactly.
yeah, when you share an example like from your dad, it helped so much within my understanding, just you literally sharing about your experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
everyone's got just a slightly different experience, so we can all learn from each other, And I think, yeah, so I've got some workshops and we'll be doing more things like that.
That's amazing. And is that, I assume everything is on your website, or do you focus more on your Instagram? Like where's the best place for people to go?
And they can go to my website, which is cathcounihan.com, and they can search for Grow Yourself Up on any podcast platform. And on Instagram, I'm Cath Counihan.
I'll pop everything below anyway in the link so they can find them easily. But Cath, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for doing this. It's been
Pleasure.
helpful for me, I'm sure to my listeners. So thank you so much and so much love to you.
So much love to you too.